The name of the movie is Rescue Dawn. The film begins with an army commander telling fighter pilots about their next mission, where they will cross North Vietnam and bomb the enemy's main targets. He assures them that the mission is confidential and that they do not have to tell their families about it. Then he asks them to watch a video on how to survive in the jungle if their plane is shot down. One of the pilots, Dieter Dengler, a recent graduate, is sitting next to a friend. They were mocking the information that appears in the video. Soon after, the pilot prepares to take off. As soon as they are given the go-ahead, Dieter takes off and joins the rest of the pilots in the sky. The 4 planes were flying towards their target. After a few hours of flight, each plane maneuvers to drop bombs on targets. Dieter does the same, but his wings are hit and he loses control of the plane. Then he tells his friends that he can't leave the place. As expected, his plane crashes, and fortunately Dieter survives, but the danger does not end there. Once he gets up, he runs into the forest to try to hide from the enemy forces. He drops his radio and his weapon and walks cautiously into the woods. While walking in the woods, he tries to find something to help him. He finds a potato and saves it for later. He sleeps there, and when he wakes up he looks around to see if there is anyone near him. Helicopter flying in the woods, but they can't find him, except in the event of a smoke signal. As soon as he came out, a boy and his mother passed in front of him, but he managed to avoid them. After a short while, he continues walking until he reaches a large rock, climbs it, and takes a look at his whereabouts. He looks at the sky to find a plane looking for him. Unfortunately, he does not find any American aircraft or any aircraft of the Allies, so he continues to push forward, hoping to get away from the local militia. After a short while, he found a cave with water. He goes down to drink water, but is surprised by the presence of militias around him. One of the men pulls his hair and points a gun at him, and Dieter is taken prisoner. When he wakes up, he finds a boy playing with a stick on his head while the militia watches him. After a few moments, the militias started running, crossed a suspension bridge, and returned to the forest. While they rest, after hours of moving, a helicopter passes overhead. They are trying to shoot the helicopter, and they thought the plane had spotted them. Then they blame Dieter that he may have contacted someone. He denies this and tells them that the helicopter did not spot them because of the thick trees in the forest. But the Vietnamese did not believe him and fired a bullet near his ear. Once again they move, and after a while they reach a house that looked normal. But it turns out that it is a military headquarters of the enemy. Inside the headquarters, a high-ranking officer is talking to Dieter. After he refused to sign a document presented by the officer, the men begin to punish Dieter by dragging him with a buffalo. Because of extreme fatigue, he loses consciousness. Later, when he wakes up, he realizes that he is hanging upside down and militia have tied a nest of insects to his face. Then they spun him and he felt dizzy and he was too weak to resist. Then they put Dieter in a water well. Later, he is put in a hut where he hears the voice of his fellow prisoners. Later, he gets to know the rest of the prisoners, and they plan to find a way out. The next day, Dieter spearheads the plan, but realizes that some of the prisoners have been here for years, and they're convinced they won't get out alive. However, the American pilot has plans on how to obtain items that they can use to escape. He goes to one of the enemy guards and asks him for toothpaste, and while he was talking to the guard, he stole a nail from the pole. At night, he untied the prisoner's handcuffs. The next morning, they continue planning how to escape, but for some prisoners, staying in prison was better than escaping from the dense forest. Unexpectedly, the guards come to the huts to search. They tried to find out if the prisoners were hiding something. One of the guards finds a glass shard that looks like a lens in one of them's pockets. Dieter tries to explain it on behalf of a friend. He tells them that they use it to shave. They can convince the guard and get away with it. Later, he collected grains of rice and hid them in his water bowl. Months later, the prisoners celebrated his birthday despite their harsh conditions. He divides the rice among them. Then he carefully plans how to get out of the prison camp. While planning an escape, he takes a small mirror and uses it to see if someone is watching them. And when he realizes that no one is watching them, he gets excited to run away. Later, they notice the arrival of the guards and handcuff themselves to avoid the guards becoming suspicious of them. The next day, the prisoners get their share of food, and the meal was barely enough for them. But they decided to save some food for later. That night, the prisoners worked together to dig a hole at the bottom of the hut. The plan was for them to get out without being noticed by the guards, and they should be able to. In the dark, Dieter emerges from under the hut and digs a hole in a wooden wall. The next morning, he goes out to check what he did last night with a friend named Dwayne. A guard with a gun sees them and warns them to stay away from the walls. The plan was in progress, and they only needed to determine the day of implementation. But as might be expected, some of the prisoners were comfortable remaining in prison, to the extent that one of them threatened to scream and tell the guards at the time of their escape. Nevertheless, Dieter continues with the escape plan and refuses to give up. Somehow he managed to convince his colleagues to escape. Later, when food is served, the prisoners are given a plate of worms. The prisoners refuse to eat it, except for Dieter's, which he considered to be a good source of protein. Later that night, they couldn't sleep as they were thinking of their plan. The next day, around noon, the guards suddenly entered the hut. While flying a helicopter in the woods, the guards start beating them and they shoot the prisoners. Because of what happened, the idea of escaping became more logical than staying in prison. When they were talking, they decided that the escape would be the next day. One of the guards overhears their conversation and enters the hut. Later, Dieter takes the rice he was collecting to feed his teammates so they can have strength during their escape. They started digging, and when they got out undetected, Dieter returned to the hut to get some weapons. And after taking the weapons, he goes towards the enemies, and while they were eating, he shot them. After killing them all, he took the food with him and then left the camp. They reached a big cave. He told them that the enemy knows the forest better than they do, and in order to increase their chances of survival, they should go in different directions. Dieter and Dwayne go in the same direction, while others move in different directions. After several days of walking, they came across a river and the water was pulling them in, but Dieter managed to hold on to something. They managed to save themselves. Moments later, Dieter heard a voice, and they discovered that he was a hunter on the other side, so they avoided him. After a while of walking, he found a shoe and gave it to Dwayne. Then he threw the guns into the river, thinking that there were no more enemies to pursue. They find a cabin and decide to take a break. After a few moments, they heard the sounds of planes. He tried to scream for help, but no one could hear him. He burns the hut to attract the attention of the planes, but is shot at. Then they keep walking. They come across a boy and ask him for water, but the boy runs to warn his tribe. They try to attack them, and as a result, Dwayne gets hit and dies. While Dieter manages to escape, the tribe members start chasing him. Fortunately, he managed to escape. That night, he was unable to sleep because of his grief over what happened to his friend. The next day, he saw a group of armed men who were supposed to be from the enemy forces. And when they left, he went to their camp to get some leftovers. The next day, he saw a snake and caught it. After that, tried to eat the snake. Then he saw a helicopter hovering nearby, and he tried to get the pilot's attention by waving a banana leaf. At first, he thought the helicopter crew had not noticed him. However, they noticed his presence and returned to him. They lowered the rope to him, and he was able to climb into the helicopter. Then the militias arrive and shoot at the helicopter, but the pilot manages to escape. They asked him about his name, and when they found out who he was, they were happy because they had found the missing pilot, and he was still alive despite his months in prison. Then he was taken to the hospital. After that, Dieter recovers and the doctors celebrate his birthday. Then they took him on a tour and he was surprised that everyone greeted him. After a while, he retired and became a civilian pilot. Here the movie ends. Thank you for watching.